Welcome back to the channel. Today we're in Poissy to go through the Villa Savoye project together. This is one of the most influential buildings in the 20th century and probably the most recognizable building by Le Corbusier. And I can tell you, even though the weather that day wasn't the best, visiting the project was a revelation for me. If you're interested in architecture, this is an absolute must. One of those few buildings that you will always take with you. Before we start, I would like to ask you to leave a like and subscribe if you find the content interesting. It really helps the channel. And to thank my Patreons for their continued support. If you want to support as well, you will find the link in the description below to my profile. I will focus on some of the reasons for the project's transcendence and impact in all architecture, and will structure the video in 4 bullet points. Villa Savoye as a project, timeline within Le Corbusier's architecture, culmination and significance, and contradictions. In 1928, the Savoye family, a high-class family from Paris, commissioned Le Corbusier to design and build a countryside retreat for them. At that time, Le Corbusier had been living in the city since 1917, gained reputation as a painter and building projects like the La Roche-Jeanneret and Ossenfant houses, and was known in the intellectual circles of the city. The initial requirements for the project were quite loose, focusing on room types, motor access, equipments and modern installations such as kitchen systems and heating and cooling. Right away, Le Corbusier and his cousin started to work on a first proposal that was shared with the family at the beginning of 1929. The design process was quite easy and it consisted of 5 proposals for the house. The first proposal already showed most of the final characteristics of the build project. The ground floor shows the radius on the northeast side of the house that the car of the Savoye family was able to turn. Ramp center axis and a straight flight staircase that connected all levels. The room of the Savoyes was located on the solarium level. The second proposal changes the proportions of the house to a rectangle on a 5-meter grid and removes the ramp, having a stair connecting all levels on the interior and a spiral staircase connecting the hanging garden on the first level with the bedroom of the Savoyes on the second. It also included a stair on the north facade connecting the hanging garden and the ground level. The third proposal shows the project being completely reshaped, organized in overlaid blocks with communication hallways and a hanging garden facing south. The fourth proposal goes back to a rectangular proportion. It has a more roundly shaped stair parallel to the ramp that connects all 3 levels of the house. The rooms for the service are already located on the ground floor. The final project shows some minor updates from the previous. The orientation of the stair has changed, now rotated 90 degrees respect to the ramp. The ramp that connects the lower ground of the house with a distribution area on the first floor articulates all rooms around it. The kitchen and living room located on a strip on the north side and the rooms on an L shape. The hanging garden can be accessed from the living room through the big glazed door, through the door next to the arrival of the ramp, or through the boudoir next to the main room. The second ramp connects the hanging garden with the solarium. This way, all the main spaces for the house are elevated from the floor, almost levitating. A box in the air, no more hesitations about architectural play of space and mass. An equilibrium in the vertical volumes of the house, in the built mass with a classical form on the ground level through the pilotis, the clearly defined volume that delineates the first floor, and the free forms of the solarium. Also, the house changes on its directionality. The house must not have a front. Positioned at the top of the dome, it must open towards south to the 4 horizons. The project construction was finished in 1931 and delivered to their new owners, although several repairs had to be done in the next years due to construction quality issues and leaks. The house was inhabited between 1931 and 1937, and from then on it remains empty and in a semi-abandoned state for approximately 20 years. During the war it was used as a hay storage by the German army. In 1958, the city of Poissy purchased the house and had the intention of demolishing it to build a school on the plot. Ironically, Le Corbusier was proposed as the architect for the project. This puts Le Corbusier on alert, and using all available means at his disposal, initiates procedures to avoid the demolition of the project, proposes to personally take charge of its rehabilitation, its conversion into a museum, and its inclusion as a historical monument. Between 1959 and his death in 1965, he continues his efforts to protect his work, and he ensures that the house, that was going through the restoration process under the control of de Boisson and considering Le Corbusier's input, remains protected. The building is included in the Registry of Historical Monuments in December of 1965, 3 months after his death. Villa Savoye has the importance and significance not only within Le Corbusier's work, also within modern architecture, of being one of the most important buildings in the 20th century. As we mentioned earlier in the video, Le Corbusier gets the request for the project in 1928, and this is the end of the experimentation and development period that lasted 20 years. In this period, he embraced industrialization. The use of concrete separates himself from his previous architectures linked to classicism. There is a quest for standardization, develops concepts as the Citroën, his 5 points for a new architecture, and all this of course without forgetting his work as an artist. A period focused on laying the foundations of a new architecture. His complete works was published in the same 1929. And he sees that time as the closure of the experimentation period. The first series comprised the years 1910 to 1929, that is 20 years of research. This year meant to me, to a certain extent, the end of the first period of research. Villa Savoye sits right in that limit. And besides showing all the elements of Le Corbusier's architecture, Villa Savoye is the highest expression of all of them. A new vision for the house with classical references, purist and linked to the machine, that could be seen as a temple of the machine era. Because the concepts he developed for a new architecture could be seen already in other of his previous projects, although not in such a high level of expression. The Osenfant house that will encapsulate everything that will be visible in all his white villas, the classical proportions devoid of ornament with some almost industrial elements. The La Roche-Jeanneret house, now where the Le Corbusier Foundation has its headquarters, is a more refined and representative interpretation of his concepts. These two houses are very important in Le Corbusier's oeuvre. Additionally, in both of these projects, a promenade architectural can be seen, as well as the use of polychromy through the use of his own color palette, the purist palette. In his own words, man needs color, and color is the immediate spontaneous expression of life. Due to all the different stages the Savoye house went through, and although there is an extensive amount of documentation, you can see that several samples have been done on site to find out the exact colors and amount of layers used. The 5 points are a vital part of the project: pilotis, continuous windows, free plan, free facade, and roof garden. More specifically, the creation of the domino concept, or the reduction of the load-bearing elements of the house to pillars and slabs, carrying the loads down and freeing the facade to work only as a skin. In the case of the Villa Savoye, the pilotis run around the perimeter of the house on the ground floor, a peristyle. Not a simple column bearing weight, but rather a square grid that forms a portico on three sides of the home in pentastyle. This allows to raise the building that would appear to be floating, carry the weights to the floor, have a free circulation area on the ground floor. The pilotis carry the weight of the house above the ground, up in the air, and moves away from masonry architecture, which implied a connection to the ground. The use of pilotis leads to the notion of free plan, separating structure from partitions, and makes the facade independent to run clean continuous windows and openings, not linked to structural loads. The roof garden, facing south, is not the end of the route but the center of the house, and the central articulation between the first and second floors. A way to have a clean garden inside the house away from ground level, acting as a distributor of light and sunshine. Le Corbusier uses the term le cercle. It is on the hanging garden that the sliding glass walls of the salon and other rooms of the house open freely. Thus the sun is everywhere, in the very heart of the house. The most important and differential element of the house is the inclusion of the ramp that makes all the spaces flow from the moment you enter. If Le Corbusier defines the sun as the heart of the house, the ramp would be the spine. From the ground floor to the rooftop solarium, passing from inside to outside. Located in the central axis of the house, it can be perceived from the outside through the glass. Through the ramp, visitors turn around inside, not really understanding what they can see and feel. They cannot relate anything here to what is commonly considered as a house. The promenade architecturale, the process of movement through the flow in space, a pivotal point of the speciality of the project. A resource that can be seen in the storyboards he created for the Meyer house, to explain the different rooms and spaces of the house to the future owner. A forerunner of the promenade architecturale, the cinematographic look of art in motion through these storyboards. Le Corbusier as an architect and an artist, with different stages, different personalities. His approaches are full with tensions and unresolved contradictions, a very complex and non-dogmatic thought. An intricate personality and work that starts in the Art Nouveau, touches on classicism for a moment, and goes on through a vast production of paintings, theories, drawings, and projects across his life. Because he was both a painter and an architect, a painter in the morning and an architect in the afternoon. And although his work as an architect is highly regarded, he considered that to be an architect he would need to be a painter as well. His architecture was radical in a double sense, both revolutionary and returning to roots. That's why I wanted to dig a bit more in the contradictions of the project, or perhaps labeling them as oppositions would be more accurate. He's able to reconcile them, despite their apparent contradictions. On the one hand, rationalism with his aphorism, "House is a machine for living in an era of the machine and standardization. An era of new industrial materials that reduce the variability. On the other hand, idealism through architecture is the wise, correct and magnificent play of volumes arranged under the light. Or the house is a machine for emotions. The table placed in the hanging garden of the Savoye can be seen in another of his projects, the Ville Lac, next to the opening on the wall to look out to the lake, a lyrical gesture. Le Corbusier used the expression coming from purism, the object type, and he wanted architecture to imitate these object types. If cars can be built in a factory, why can't houses? Because the Villa Savoye stands on the rational side of his concepts, but at the same time it looks and feels as a handmade object and misses the precision and polish of an industrial object. industrialization, and fixed materials, as he called them. Materials that in production express themselves always exactly the same way, materials with a low variability. But in the house, he uses wood frames for the sliding windows instead of the steel frame used by other of his contemporaries. Interestingly enough, during the restoration that took place in the house between 1963 and 1965, Jean Duvoisin, the architect in charge, decided with Le Corbusier's input to replace all wood windows with aluminium ones. Although from the distance the house appears to be a white block floating in the middle of the pair, soon the two sides painted on green, matching the lawn, are unfolded on the exterior, as well as the black window frames on the ground floor, contrasting with the white surfaces. The interior, flooded by the purest color palette, shows colors defined by Le Corbusier for all the rooms and even separated into plans, combining different colors within the same room. The opposition of both placed together. A stair separates one floor from another, a ramp links them together. The former is gradual, while the latter is rapid and destabilizing. An axis is perhaps the first human manifestation. It is the means of every human act. The toddling child moves along an axis. The man striving in the tempest of life traces for himself an axis. The axis is the regulator of architecture, but he also adds later in opposition. Architectural buildings should not all be placed upon axis, for these would be like so many people all talking at once. Static nature of the box and grid, and dynamic flow of the processional path that guides the visitor from the ground up to the solarium. The Promenade Architecturale articulates all levels of the house, inside and outside. A veritable Promenade Architecturale, constantly offering varied, unexpected, sometimes surprising aspects. It is interesting to achieve such diversity when one has accepted, from a construction perspective, a completely rigid grid of columns and beams. As I mentioned before, there is no main facade in the building. All facades of the building are composed differently, although arranged in pairs. Front and back and lateral facades. The southeast facade, the first one the visitor can see, could be regarded as the rear facade, being the main one the northwest. Within the house and within the project. Inside the villa, he creates two types of spaces: anthropometric and utilitarian space type for communication spaces, bedrooms and bathrooms, used therefore during shorter periods of time, and very generous spaces and volumes that generate lightness for spaces used during the day, such as the terrace and the living room. This is seen clearly in the Weissenhof project as well, and Le Corbusier expresses a vast room which is lived throughout the whole day, benefiting from a larger space, a large cube of air, and a flood of light. Two types of spaces, airy and fluid versus utilitarian and specific. And within the project, the main house, spacious, elegant, fitted with the latest advances in technology, and on the other hand, the gardener's lodge, where you have the experience of minimum architecture, the dialogue between main villa and the small reduced experience of architecture. An architect, an artist in constant movement, whose sole purpose was in his work and in the unresolved tensions of his evolution. An artist, an architect who balanced himself between absolutes and emotions. This is all for today. I really hope you liked the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.